Good evening and welcome to Community Forum. I'm your host Byron Campbell and our co-host Chris Diali is overseas. Chris, are you there? Can you hear me? Hello Chris, can you hear me? Okay, welcome Chris. You're on.
Welcome. Thanks, Byron, and good evening to all our listeners and viewers. It's a pleasure to be back again after we took that 1 week absence. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, Chris. Well, we have an interesting program this evening. Our special guest is Dr. Curland Gilchrist. Of course, he's the chairman of the Wages and Advisory Committee, a cabinet-appointed committee, and he'll be joining us after our community, Chris, what we call it, chit-chat. Chris, you're off island. Yesterday we had, it was a special day for Grenada. We had our, the launching of the 50th anniversary celebration. Big, fireworks, culture. I mean, you missed an important event, I should tell you, being out of state.
I did. I saw excerpts of what was put on,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
my compliments to the organizers. I thought it went well, and everybody, based on the comments, they were all positive based on what I saw and read. So I think it went on well. And as I say, I compliment the organizers for the start and how the program started. I think that is a good start for the 50th anniversary, and we hope that the events leading up to our 1 year celebration into next year is going to be something to look forward to.
But Chris, we're going to take a short pause, a short break, just to bring in our sponsors for a moment, and we'll be right back. Please stay with us.
Community Forum comes to you in association with the Grenada Development Bank.
The choice to finance your education is clear. Try the Grenada Development Bank Won't You Dare. Our special student loan was designed with care for your growth, development, and welfare. This is how champions are made. Take on that challenge. Don't ever be afraid. Our special student loan will come to your aid with 100% of your study costs being paid. Vulnerability is but a temporary condition, and conquering it is strictly ambition. You can secure victory despite your position with a loan for accommodation, books, and tuition. We see your potential. We notice your drive. So on your marks, get set. Let your dreams come alive. Don't let hurdles of doubt get in your way, because you are the future. Contact GDB today. Our special student loan is just one application away. Grenada Development Bank. Development through financing.
Viewers, welcome back to Community Forum. I'm your host, Byron Campbell. I'm your co-host. Chris is on Zoom with us. Chris, just before the break, of course, we are talking about the 50th anniversary celebrations. There's just one thing I want to mention. I was just reading a note from a local newsperson, and he was saying, great program on the Carnage last night to kick off the 50th anniversary celebration, as we said. However, he said what was missing was the failure of the organizers to invite the MP for the Tongue of St. George, Peter David, to welcome all and sundry to the Carnage for this historic event. Guys, he said, let's look beyond partisan politics for this 50th anniversary of independence. That's an important point because we want the whole nation, we want everybody, all and sundry, to be part of it. So we have to ensure that everyone is on board. There's no partisan in this event.
Was he
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just reading. I'm just quoting. I'm just quoting what the news reporter said. Yeah, Chris. Maybe not. But if he wasn't, then it's something. It was an oversight. Something to note. I don't know, Chris. What was happening last week? Of course, in the Parliament was a Fiscal Responsibility Act. There were some amendments to it. Is an area you're familiar with. What's your take on it?
I think it was he. Was he not invited?
I don't know. I'm just reading. I'm just quoting what the news reporter said. Yeah. Chris. Maybe not. But if he wasn't, then it's something. It was an oversight. Something to note. I don't know, Chris. What was happening last week? Of course, in the Parliament was a Fiscal Responsibility Act. There was some amendments to it. Is an area you're familiar with. What's your take on it?
It is now termed the Fiscal Resilience Bill. It's no longer a Fiscal Responsibility Act. So it's now called a different thing. So the caption of the bill is now Resilience Bill. And when I looked at what was debated in Parliament and some of the comments, there are some positive changes because the FROC, as you know, who monitors what happens on the fiscal side in the country and given through the Responsibility Act, given mandates to ensure government stay within the confines of the metrics put in that one. They had indicated in the past that things like the debt wasn't properly recorded because a lot of the statutory bodies' debt wasn't included in the total debt bill of the country, and I think they're making moves to deal with that now, as well as oversight for certain things in government in terms of what is done, and so they can get a better reading of the actual situation. So there are some positive things coming out from the resilience bill, but the one that stood out to me is the move of the metric of wage bill for the public service, moving it from 9% to 13%. And as you know, in absolute terms, it's a 4% increase, but it's a 44% increase over where it was from 13, moving from 9 to 13. And it is significant because when the IMF, after we had gone through what we had in Ivan and so on, and the debt restructuring and all of that, one of the things coming out of those consultations with the IMF and the World Bank and so on was the fact that government will be given some sort of responsibility and constraint and restraint in how they used to manage the wage bill, public sector wage bill. And remember in those days we had something called Vote 340, where ministers were given unfettered access to bring on people to the government wage bill and increase the wage bill out of context. And that is one of the reasons why in those days, P.S. Timothy and Twine, when they were doing all the negotiations, decided that government will be given some level of restrictions and control by linking things to GDP. And the wage bill was one, and that was touted. The FRA was touted as one of the most progressive bills and acts that we enacted after all the struggles with the hurricane and what we went on, and manage the economy better. And we did do that, having these restrictions. So to move it from 9 to 13 now, I think is going to raise the eyebrows at the international lending agencies like the IMF and the World Bank and so on, to understand how government is going to meet its commitments and giving them all this more room to deal with it, and whether or not the revenues are going to be sufficient enough to meet all the other programs, social and otherwise, and infrastructure-wise, with a wage bill climbing from 9 to 13% in absolute terms. So I think that is something that did raise eyebrows, and it will be interesting to see when we do the next rounds with the IMF, what the IMF thinks in its comments in that movement of the public sector wage bill from 9% to 13% of GDP, and what the possible impacts. Government got a lot of soft loans in the way they manage the economy through the FRA, and it is going to see whether or not that is going to have impact on revenues in terms of loans and the interest rates and all those type of things.
So there's something for us to look at and follow in the comment period. I was looking at part of it live in the Parliament, and I was a bit disappointed. The opposition leader walked out, and I was looking forward to a meaningful debate that will bring out the issues and understanding for the public. I just think that officials should have more greater ability to stay and debate, and so the nations can understand the issues better. But thanks for that explanation, Chris. It's very important. Two issues I want to touch on quickly. Regional, international, you might wonder how they affect us, but I think they have implications to certainly our energy, the energy markets and likely food markets also. Let me start off with Guyana and Venezuela, the border dispute, the disputed territory of some 61,000 square miles. That's a large area, is now before the International Court of Justice. They have ruled in April that it is in their jurisdiction. They have the jurisdiction to deal with it. So we're really hopeful that there's some amicable, there's some settlement on these issues. It has implication for us, Petro-Carib and all kind of issues with us, Guyana, where it's going now as an oil producing state. The other important issue, Chris, and we touched on it. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I say, the Venezuela-Guyana thing has been going on for a number of years, and Guyana won all the things through the United Nations and so on, saying that Venezuela have no right. And when you look at the map, Venezuela is trying to annex at least 75% of Guyanese country.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's in this world, but when you see what is happening with the Russia-Ukraine war, where countries who feel they have power and military might, they just annex land without no sort of consideration for the people's sovereign territory based on what was declared earlier. And you see now Palestine and Israel. You really have to ask yourself if, this Guyana-Venezuela thing is going to escalate, and hopefully it doesn't. And both parties are willing, but Venezuela have stated quite categorically that they would not accept the ruling of the United Nations, and they plan to challenge it in whatever way they plan. And you have to be concerned about that. And what is happening now in the world.
In addition to that, they have a national vote or whatever on the matter with their citizens on the 4th of December, I believe. Moving on, Chris, of course, the Palestinian-Israeli situation, this continues, very unfortunately, I think, that we have last numbers showing over 9,000 people killed, a large percentage being women and children. It is, when you listen to the news now, you're being told that, viewer discretion is advised. The scenes are so terrible. I don't know how to describe it, Chris, but one thing was heartening is that at the UN Emergency Special Session, on a resolution for a humanitarian ceasefire, that this vote went down, 124 and 14 against, and I was heartened to know that Grenada voted in favor of the resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. I'm very proud of my country here and the Caribbean generally, but I know Jamaica stayed away from the UN. I don't know why Jamaica is hiding, but I think it's an opportunity for us and more of our Caribbean leaders to come forward. I'm very heartened to see on the weekend demonstrations, support for the Palestinians all over the world, in all major cities around the world, north, south, east, and west. We had our pouring of support for the Palestinian cause. And what was important too, something moved me. I heard a child talking, a young boy, probably about 9, and although he was in ragged and in blood, he's saying, "Look, I'm in high spirits. I'm here for the long term." So we're really looking for a ceasefire, I think, on this matter, humanitarian matter. That Israel, I think, it's just appalling and inhumane, criminal, in fact. It's been called everywhere, in the UN, everywhere, that this is a crime against humanity. And I think all of us should stand up for a ceasefire is really critical, Chris.
Well, I think this matter now in the UN, from a UN perspective, is considering it tantamount to genocide of some form. Of course, the International Criminal Court is getting involved. And whether or not Israel and the United States are signatories, they are purporting that you could still bring them up for war crimes. So it is something that the Western world and the European world and this side of the world seems to be agreeing that Israel have a right to defend itself, but not in the manner in which it is doing. And it seems as though the sentiment in the world is that why are Palestinians treated as less than human compared to the people in Ukraine, compared to some of the struggles that went on in Africa and so on. And these are people that have been under apartheid-type conditions for many, many years. So there seemed to be a swinging of sentiment. I saw a thing today about President Biden's approval rating has been the lowest it has been, and they're attributing some of that to his support to Israel and what they're doing in Palestine. So I don't know if these things will have impact and have Israel change their methodology in which they're trying to eliminate Hamas and probably the Gaza Strip.
Chris, one thing a person should know is that you presently have 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza. You know, out of the 2.3 million people, 50,000 women there are pregnant. How do you? In other words, all the babies, all the young ones coming up in this kind of experience, where are their minds going to be? But the question is, I mean, as we saw on television, as we continue to see, you can't bomb a whole neighborhood and say that you're selecting Hamas. I mean, there is no reason, there is no justification in this. So, but I think the important thing now, Chris, is a ceasefire.
You can't bomb out the ideology.
That's the point.
You could kill people, but your generations coming forward. You can't eliminate Hamas, a military group, by bombing out the ideology that Hamas stands for, and that is the key thing. You will create a more deadly group of Hamas people coming out of this than. So I don't know if Israel's tactic here would get rid of Hamas from the point of view of the ideology that Hamas is trying to defend, which is occupation, and that is, I think that is the key to the entire thing. This military thing, they kill thousands of people and say get rid of all the leaders in Hamas now, but they're just others waiting to replace them.
I've been looking at some statistics, in fact, Chris, that for every 100 Israelis there, the Israelis are going to kill 1,000 Palestinians. So right now Hamas would have killed 14, that's the report says. So now they're up to 9,000, they're going to 14,000. That would be the threshold. So it seems like that must be accomplished. But one thing, in moving on, Chris, I'm just pleased, as I said, to see the overwhelming global support. And if it's one thing that this event, this is bringing back the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian case for justice, for peace on the agenda. And I think that's important. Chris, I noticed the lights are on, our traffic lights are on. It's a positive thing. Traffic is flowing. There are a few complaints here and there, but I think with time this will be synchronized. So we're pleased to see them all working. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think the technicians are still going about trying to get the timings right in the peak periods of traffic. The real busy traffic areas like the lights down at Food Fair intersection down there and the one in Belmont, as we're seeing on television. I think the real busy ones and the side traffic that is coming into the main traffic will now have to go by the lights. But I think the bigger issue is the pedestrians.
Yeah.
Pedestrians now have to wait on the light to change to cross. They can't just cross willy-nilly and as free as they think they can. Now the traffic will get a better amount of flow time compared to when pedestrians now have to gather on the side and wait for the traffic lights to change and allow them to cross safely. So I think that is some positive things. I would love to see the government put some traffic lights on some of the pedestrians crossings, in particular the one down by CKs, if that is possible. The one in Tantine for the students, I think we need to have crossing lights there with a timer on it so that we could manage the amount of crossings and pedestrians crossing so that traffic could get some ability to flow with some level of efficiency. So, and that I think will also help with the traffic congestion and pile up that we see with the lights. And of course, motorists need to pay attention to the fact that we have cameras now. And if you're about to break the light, whether in off or in the middle of the night or 2 or 3 in the morning, you probably get a ticket in the mail. Yeah.
Beautiful. Chris, we have to move on. We have, again, our special guest here, Dr. Curland Gilchrist, Chairman of the Wages and Advisory Committee, to talk about minimum wage. So viewers, please stay with us. We'll be right back with Dr. Gilchrist. Thank you.
The choice to finance your education is clear. Try the Grenada Development Bank Won't You Dare. Our special student loan was designed with care for your growth, development, and welfare. This is how champions are made. Take on that challenge. Don't ever be afraid. Our special student loan will come to your aid with 100% of your study costs being paid. Vulnerability is but a temporary condition, and conquering it is strictly ambition. You can secure victory despite your position with a loan for accommodation, books, and tuition. We see your potential. We notice your drive. So on your marks, get set. Let your dreams come alive. Don't let hurdles of doubt get in your way because you are the future. Contact GDB today. Our special student loan is just one application away. Grenada Development Bank. Development through financing.
Concerned about your general health and wellness?
Do you need to know your complete blood count, lipid profile, or HbA1c?
Maybe you're an athlete or work in an environment that requires regular drug screening.
Interested in STI screening? What about renal, liver, or thyroid tests?
All these tests, plus hundreds more, are available at Allied Laboratories.
At Allied Laboratories, we are committed to providing the best service with accurate results. We now have 3 fully equipped locations to better serve you. You can contact our Grand Anse branch at 403-3488. You can contact our Grenville branch at 410-3488. Or you can contact our newest addition, the Guelph branch, at 404-3488. Or send us an email.
We're taking care of Grenada.
Welcome back, viewers, and we're here with Dr. Curland Gilchrist. Dr. Gilchrist is a lecturer at SGU, but he's here in this capacity this evening as chairman of the Wages Advisory Committee. So 2 committee actually, and chairman of the Public Sector Pension Reform Committee also. So welcome, Dr. Gilchrist. This is our pleasure to have you on Community Forum.
Thank you very much. It's my first time.
Tell us briefly, what is the primary purpose of establishing a minimum wage? Why do we need a minimum wage? And maybe you could tell us, because we hear a lot about living wage. Is there, how do you compare them? Is it the same thing or is it different?
No, it's not the same thing,
Okay,
fine. but it's a question that many countries can answer.
Yeah.
Because, most countries have a minimum wage. And sad to say, Byron, the way the economic system in the West function, wages should be determined by demand and supply. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Demand for wages and the supply based on people offering the services. Mm-hmm. And that should determine the wage payable. Mm-hmm. But we know sometimes that don't give you an outcome that allows people to earn a decent living. So countries have decided to intervene, into the market, mm-hmm. and offer protection by way of establishing a floor, mm-hmm. for wages payable. And the origin to this lies in the fact that outside of trade unionism, some workers have no other form of protection, nobody to fight for them. So you mm-hmm. find that the state mm-hmm. tend to intervene. So its origin lies more in a category of workers that were non-unionized, Mm-hmm. There it started mm-hmm. and was broadened by countries to include low wage earners, that lower echelon mm-hmm. of the workforce. And also what happens over time as you pursue wealth and you pursue profit, the issue of exploitation. Not all employers behave good. Some misbehave or unfair.
Okay.
And that cry, that cry of labor being abused and misused and exploited, and therefore the state seems to intervene by passing legislation that tells the employer, you shall not pay a wage.
There's a threshold.
Below that threshold. So that's kind of the origin, of where things are.
Dr. Gilchrist, it is understood in some circles, mm-hmm. not everyone, mm-hmm. that the minimum wage policy should be calibrated to keep overall wage growth in line with productivity gains. is the productivity factor being applied in your minimum wage recommendations?
Okay, so that issue has arisen, and that's a legitimate concern, and that's the ideal situation. And in that context, then we don't need to have the state passing legislation. Yeah, that productivity, when it manifests itself, should redound towards ascribing value to labor justly and equitably.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we agree to that statement, that's okay. But it doesn't always work out to be like that. Yeah, sometimes there is no relationship between the two. But we emphasize in this exercise in Grenada for the last 10 months, we encourage workers to be as productive as possible. And you know my usual phrase, to whom much is given, much is expected.
I've heard that before from you.
Yeah, so I'm saying that there's a higher calling, there's a higher expectation when the employer has given you an increase. Yeah, much is expected of you, and so on. So in our situation, the way we have looked at this exercise and the way my committee, by the way, the wages advisory committee is a tripartite committee. So we have 9 members, 3 representing employers, 3 representing employees. Yeah, trade unions. Yeah, so that's 6 and 3 nominated by the government. So it's tripartite. So we have balanced views as we discuss. Yeah. So our mandate is to examine the extent to which the wages order of 2011 can be adjusted in keeping with cost of living increases and other factors. Yeah. So that's our remit.
Well, you know, there's an important thing in arriving at this, in the committee arriving at its decision in the minimum wage adjustments. To what extent or what force did you apply to moral, social, and economic factors? Was it only economic factors, or you look at moral and social factors? You know, how did you go about?
Straight answer: only economic factors.
Only economic factors.
Yeah. While we were conscious of the social factors and their relationship with economics and social, but we were constrained, to look at the economic factors. We were constrained because its relationship with.
So we look at the economic factors. So we can say the economic factors. Employers, if you look at economics mainly, employers may respond to increases in minimum wage in several ways: hiring fewer workers, reducing the hours worked, passing on some of the cost of the higher wages to their customers, or they may choose to absorb this cost in a lower profits. What do you anticipate what the likely response from our local employers? What's the feedback you get?
Yes, and I must say we have met with most employers, all sectors. We have had detailed discussion, and our approach as a committee was to build consensus on the increases.
Okay.
And in building consensus, we are looking for employers to take ownership, right, of the increase that is being proposed. Our committee only make recommendation. Ultimate decision lies with the government. So I want to get that straight, right? We only recommend. Okay? So our approach is consensus building. Speak to employers. We discuss the issues. We look at what the possibilities are, to what extent they could absorb, 2%, 3%, 4%. We look at all these
larger
things.
percentage. I see 100%. Chris, are you there?
Yeah. So, but what happened?
Here and I'm listening to
Chris
you
is
guys
talking
and
about
I'm
4
getting ready to-
5%, but we saw cases where there is 180%.
Yeah. Wait. Take it easy. All right, take it easy.
I am. Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, calm down. You're behaving like what I heard in Parliament between 4% and 44%, right? Yeah? Which speaks to the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Mathematically speaking,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So what has happened is that you may have seen some stuff in the media, right? In terms of rates proposed. And you saw 2 columns.
Not in the media, in the document that you released.
I didn't release it. Let us say it was available to the public,
Okay,
right?
right, fine. Okay.
Whichever means it got there.
Okay,
Let's
fine.
not go there.
Okay,
But
fine.
I accept is the document,
Fine,
right?
good, okay.
I accept it. So I'm saying that you saw 2 columns.
Yeah.
You saw the column that refers to the minimum wage order, what exists in 2011.
That's correct.
And then you saw what is being proposed
Right.
in 2023. So that's how many years difference that is? Let me see if you know your mathematics.
A long time, too long, because you should be doing that. That's
Every
what,
3
10
years, every year.
Every year.
Right? So it's about
It's too
12
lo-
years.
So it's too long,
Yeah,
obviously.
12 years.
It's unfair
Yeah?
to workers that wages were not reviewed in the as by law.
Yeah, yeah. So most people look at the two figures and
Yeah,
they say, what? It was alarming.
yeah.
So
like
here
I'm
what?
doing now. like
Yeah.
I'm
So
doing
here
now.
what?
Yeah.
So what is missing in that
yeah,
table
yeah,
is what are the current rates payable?
yeah.
And I can tell you, if you look at the current rates payable, if there is a percentage increase, it is not beyond 17%. If you look at it. So we can explain that, and that will be explained. We have a final consultation tomorrow, and I hope you will be there.
Yeah.
And we'll be explained that. So it's not, if you compare the 2 rates over 12 years, and by the way, what we have discovered from our research and our interaction with employers, there are a lot of employers who are not paying that rate.
They're playing above that rate. Is that it?
Because the economy have grown, sectors have developed.
It's like the agriculture. Let me just tell you this.
And
piece.
let's go to agriculture.
Yeah, let me tell you this. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've been
So-
paying
so,
$60, $12 for the past 3 years, 4 years.
How much?
$60, $12 an hour.
And what is being proposed is $60.
It's $60.
So will that affect?
No, it will not affect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Chris, you want to come in
But
here?
the law stipulates
Yes, yes.
$35.
I want to get an opportunity to ask Dr.
Yes.
Gilchrist a few questions.
Very well, you're on.
And let me start off by saying that I don't think any of us, whether in the private sector or otherwise, would be against the fact that the minimum wages needed to be reviewed and adjusted accordingly to reflect what exists in society. And as you just mentioned, in agriculture and in construction, some of us are paying wages up to $60 a day, and in some cases more, based on the categories that you have put in the paper that came forward for A, B, and C people, whether it's masons and so on. But I think one of the things that we in the private sector needs to understand from how the minimum wages committee, the Labor Advisory Committee, did the analysis that I think was wanting is that I didn't understand what was the reason for some of the magnitudes. I see the tourism sector has been hit hardest in all the sectors in terms of the rate of increase. When you look at the issue of what is the effect on inflation, what studies were done to understand how inflation is going to move. We say inflation, according to the unions and labor, is around 3% or more. And of course, the statistics that come from government would not reflect that. But again, how did the Minimum Advisory Committee look at that and the possible impacts on increasing inflation and the increase in costs to the private sector? But I think the most important issue for me, Dr. Gilchrist, is I think there was one category that spoke to the fact that you have to work for 5 days a week at $12 a day. You're moving to, I think it was agriculture, and it's now $60 a day.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the bill that speaks to productivity. There is nothing in the minimum wages bill that attaches unemployment and how this is going to help deal with the unemployment situation. And I just felt that those types of contacts in terms of these level of economic indicators are not part of the minimum. We're talking about transformation, and I don't think we should talk minimum wage increases and not address the issue of productivity. I think it is a major issue that we need to deal with. And how do we get our people to come off the streets and be more productive in what they do? I don't know, even in the private sector, we struggle with adopting, I may pay you more, but I don't mean to say that you're more productive. And quite frankly, the cost for value and what we get, or the value for the cost that we're going to incur, is not going to change. And I don't see how it will help the economy move from one stage to the next, except to say, I may be putting a little more money in your hands, and you could buy a little more, spend a little more, albeit it may not be productively spent. And I don't know how we could do a minimum wage adjustment or suggest increases as we're doing without addressing the productivity issue. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Dr. Gill.
Yeah. Yes, that's valid, and that has came up in all our consultations. The issue of productivity, the issue of getting value, value for work done, and we have been conscious about that. While it is not our remit to address the productivity issue, but we are very conscious about it. And of course, our messaging to employees is always to encourage them to give value for money. Our message to employers is always look at their performance management systems, strengthen their management systems, and hold employees accountable. Hold them accountable for a day's work. So we have been, these messages that we have been giving out these messages, but Chris is hitting a point that we took in consideration. The whole issue of the impact on inflation and cost of living. Mm-hmm. And this is why there are sectors where we have tried to manage that by making sure that what is proposed does not deviate that much from market rates to minimize the impact on inflation. But there are sectors that would have an adjustment, and we are conscious about that.
Are some being phased in terms of where you have, for example, if you pull out early child care workers, what is proposed? 700 to 1,400.
That's
100% increase.
over. Yeah.
Are you going to phase this in, or do you consider the implication?
Right. So if you look
care?
at the care for the elderly, the going rates now in the market is about $1,000, right? $1,100. So you're speaking about worst case scenario, an adjustment of $200 to $300. Worst case scenario.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because if you compare to going rates and market rates, the adjustment is not.
So
that
I should
much.
not look at it in the context of the two-column document.
No, and I
because
think
that doesn't always reflect what is.
No, and let's take for example a bus conductor.
Yeah.
The current
35. You mentioned it's 35, but
it's 35. But the going rate now, the worst performing route, based on information we got from speaking to all the bus, the bus association, is $60 per day.
Okay.
That's the worst performing route.
Okay.
And a bus driver is
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Chris.
I want to ask a question. I hear the thing about the elderly care, but if I have my mom that needs three persons to work to take care of her in a 24-hour day, and we now increase the elderly thing to the levels that we've gone, and the fact is I can't afford 3 healthcare workers now, so I'm down to 1 or probably 2 in the max. What happens to the care of the person that would need a 3rd person? And what happens if I say to them, listen, I can't pay you at $1,200 or $1,500 a month. Would you accept something lower? And they accept it. I will then be breaking the law. Is there flexibilities? That's one question. The second question is, I want Curland to put his mind to, is the issue of the 40-hour week in the labor code that speaks to overtime. And we're not talking about attaching to these minimum rates the issue of you have to make your 40 hours in a week before you're entitled to overtime. You had labor as part of the committee that talking about a livable wage. We won't go back to that. But they're looking for a livable wage of $1,200 for every other category that is not covered. But they're not speaking to the issue of you making your 40 hours per week in order to be entitled to overtime.
Okay, so we need to speak to that because
in this issue.
Yeah, the rates that we have there speak to full-time employment, all right, full-time. And full-time employment generally speaking, we're speaking about a 40-hour week. But there are exceptions based on the labor code, because I think securities, they can go up to 12 hours.
And most of them
Yeah.
averages 12 hours.
Right? In the hospitality industry, they may go up to, per day, maybe 9, right? So I'm saying, even in the labor code, there are flexibility in terms of the acceptable week hour. Yeah, so but we are these rates apply to full-time employment, not part-time. This is why we said for agriculture, yeah? The current law speaks to, I believe is what?
5 hours.
5 hours, right? But you guaranteed 5 hours. You guaranteed 5 hours. So even though you work for 2 hours, the employer is obligated to pay for 5. And we have spoken to farmers. So a day is really 5 hours in the context of agricultural labor. Yeah? For other workers, a day is 8 hours and 7 hours. So what we are looking at is what is the take-home pay at the end of a full day? Right? What is the take-home pay, and whether that pay is sufficient to allow an employee to acquire the basic necessities of life.
Quality of life you're looking for.
Right?
So
The question is, Curland, if my staff member at my institution works 38 hours in a week, or 35 hours in a week, 5 days, Monday to Friday, and we have a situation where they take time off, they ain't come for the day, they have some issue to deal with, so they ain't work and they end up at 35 or 34 hours for the week. And during that week, they had a day or two where they were asked to work overtime for 2 hours, but they make the 40 hours. And I say I'm not paying overtime. Labor is going to come down on my back and say, well, the staff work for 2 hours on Monday and 2 hours on Wednesday, past the normal hour, but we ain't care about the 40-hour week. The point is, they work overtime. How do we deal with this situation?
So those are management issues.
Yeah.
No, that's not a management issue. There's a labor law issue.
Yes, but I'm saying...
Don't put it on management. There's a labor law issue. You dealing with laws, minimum wage is a law. I want you to tell me how minimum wage through the law is going to be managing this through the labor law.
Yeah, so there is
Wages
another...
advisory is your committee.
No, wages advisory, but there's also another committee looking at the labor code itself.
Yeah.
I believe is what Industrial Relations Committee,
right.
looking at labor code itself. But there are a lot of management issues and how you manage staff and the trade-off and the flexibility that a worker enjoys. And we expect workers to be reasonable. Yeah? Okay, so you get some flexibility during the day, and if you have to work an hour after 4, we expect some trade-off. And these are management and how an employer manages the relationship with the employee. Yeah, so I'm saying notwithstanding the law and the spirit of the law, it all comes down to the relationship in the workplace. And I think if an employer manages that relationship, these side issues can be really taken care of.
When you unionize is a different issue. And you just introduced a new concept in Grenada called a livable wage of $1,200 that I'm quite certain the labor component of your 9-man committee was very forceful in getting you to go there, right? The livable wage and the concept of livable wage, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, regardless of what category of work you do outside where the law look at, you fall that you must pay a minimum of $1,200 per month, regardless of what that thing is. So if I have a man in the garden and doing 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, and he doesn't fall under agricultural work, I have to pay him $1,200. Is that correct?
You are correct that we are seeking to get that national minimum.
So is that the living wage?
No. I would not call
it. You would call it that?
No, I wouldn't call it that.
How you call it?
I call it a minimum wage.
Okay,
but it's
fine.
a minimum wage that gives you some comfort that you can acquire what you need to live a simple life, satisfaction.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call it a livable wage. It's a different concept because the livable wage is really associated with a wage that if you are able to earn that wage, you are able to live above poverty. Yeah? So I don't want to go there.
But then what happens to the man that says to you, that comes to you and say, boss, I'm willing to work for $800 instead of 12?
Well, if what is recommended becomes law, the employer would not be able to adhere to that.
So what is the policy on enforcement, Colin? Because here you're looking at both civil and criminal offenses. What is the policy on enforcement?
There are penalties if there is breach.
Is your committee looking at that aspect?
No,
you're not looking at that.
But those are standard
Acts, standard laws.
That's standard laws, right?
Yeah.
If you breach,
Yeah.
for employer breach, he's
Yeah.
liable to a
Yeah.
fine and all of that. That's pretty standard.
Yeah.
But what would happen is that I'm sure if I can speak to the intent of the Ministry of Labor, there would be a public education and alerting and employees of the rights and obligation. So it's not just entitlement, but rights and obligation. Obligation goes with entitlement. So yes, you're entitled to be paid at least $1,200 a month, working full time, but the obligations that come with that. And I'm sure the ministry will be, emphasizing the obligation that goes with the
Ministry of
entitlement.
Labor that is understaffed. I don't know which Ministry of Labor you're talking about. The understaffed one or the one that will be fully staffed at some time in the future?
So
Chris,
Chris,
here's
here's the thing. So if the parties...
Anyway, but my point is, I don't see how livable wage will encourage employment, because you answer my question that if a man come by you who making nothing and he say he's willing to take $800 and I say the law say $1,200, I can't afford $1,200, the guy goes home with zero, whereas you could have paid him $8 because I will be breaking the law and that I will be open to penalties and fines if I break the law, possibly imprisonment. So I'm not understanding how setting a livable wage at $1,200 without a clause to allow some flexibility that is going to encourage unemployment to drop in this situation. I don't know if you could explain that.
Yeah, let me explain that. So we have $1,200 and we also have a daily rate that we are recommending, which is $60 a day, right? So it's $1,200 or $60 a day, working a 40-hour week.
Yeah.
So remember, we are speaking about full-time employment.
Yeah.
But we will be recommending a daily rate, for a situation like what Chris is talking about.
Chris, that's clear.
Well, if the daily rate working back to $1,200 a month is the same thing.
Yeah.
Because if the man decide you want to take $45 a day to do what he had to do based on what he's doing, and the law says 60, we're still breaking the law. So what Curland doing there is semantics. We ain't achieving our explanation to what the daily rate is going to be.
Well, Chris, I know you are law abiding, so you would educate the young man or the young woman, right? I know that because he has to do with value. He has to do how one values one labor,
Yeah.
and sometimes we don't value ourselves as we, at the level we should,
Precisely.
and we have to help people
Yeah.
value themselves properly. So, Chris, somebody comes, you
So
know
then
they're worth
my point
$80 a day. Why?
My point was unemployment. How that is going to deal with the unemployment situation? You haven't answered that. That's what my point was. If I don't want to pay $1,200 because that is the law, I can't afford, and the gentleman wants to work and he's willing to take something less, and he gets employed and he gets money to do what he has to do, you're not explaining to me how that situation is going to be dealt with from an unemployment, whether it's a daily rate or is a same thing. Well, we can move on.
Yeah,
Use of productivity in business and the use of time cards. Labor have always traditionally not be happy with the fact that private sector companies or private companies will put in a time clock and look to pay your wage based on being present and the hours. So when you clock in, you clock out, use that statistic to calculate your wage and your daily wage or your monthly wage or your fortnightly pay or whatever. Labor has always been objectionable to that. My question is, were you able to get your friends in labor to understand that if we're talking efficiency and productivity, would there be an objection to companies moving to time clocks and paying based on when you clock in and when you clock out? You could argue that management had to make sure that they have work to do and plan the job appropriately, and that's fine. Management must take that responsibility. But you cannot tell me that you're against time clock and timing and using that to calculate your wage at the end of the month is something that labor is going to object to. And I want to know if any of these discussions came up in your productivity conversation when you were talking about minimum wage and the adjustment to minimum wage.
No, it did
because
not.
As you know,
no, it did not come up.
that is a big problem we have in the country, attitude to work.
It did not come up in our discussion. But I suppose, Chris, the reason why I can't speak for labor on this point, but I suspect the reason for that may be when you look at the end of the day, what is the take-home pay for the employee?
Yeah.
And I suspect labor was concerned about the take-home pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if there is a mechanism that calculates the take-home pay, and labor feels that is not, the employer has the ability to manipulate it against against in a way that is not favorable to the employee, then I suppose they would be suspicious of that mechanism, right? So
But
at the end of the day,
the Labor Advisory Code and the Labor Code gives the employer no flexibility to touch a worker's pay, except when I contract you and I say I want you for 7.5 hours a day at a rate of X, and if I touch that, I could be hauled before the courts. So I can't touch it unless I have the permission of the worker. But if you don't report to work, or you report late, as we have with some people that are consistently late, and they report to work late, and you're losing a week, probably 3-4 hours because of lateness. Why should I pay you for that?
In addition to that, there's someone asking about personal contracts between individuals to do a particular work. How does the minimum wage affect that? It can be for
you can't go below the minimum wage by
no.
It could be for, in other words, it's a plot of work. They negotiate, look, this is $300.
Yeah, and that's a conceptual issue, but we deals with an employee-employer relationship.
Yeah.
Right? If you are
not an individual contract arrangement.
No, well, if you are like a business, right, and you are selling your services, you're a businessman.
Fine.
So we don't get, the law does not get involved in business arrangement.
Okay.
You're self-employed.
Okay.
No, I disagree.
No, in that
you
context.
cannot do a contract that is worse than the law. It has to be better, or you're ultra-virus to the law.
Yes, what I
you're
mean.
working back by the hour, and your hour is less than what the law says in the minimum wage, you're in contradiction to the law, regardless of whether the contract is between you and the person. It invalidates the
Right,
contract.
so what I'm saying, if there's an employee-employer relationship, that's where the minimum wage law kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
But a business-to-business relationship, that does not apply to the minimum wage law.
That's clear, and I think this answers the question.
Yeah, it doesn't apply.
That came in there.
I don't know why it's a business-to-business relationship that the law don't apply to Curland. You'll have to explain that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So if you have a business, like say you are you're in the gardening business.
Yeah.
You register, you're self-employed. Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying. Business-to-business relationship.
That's a different.
That's a different thing.
situation.
So if you have employees working for you and you have to pay them a wage.
That way it comes in. Curland, I'm not moving away from the subject, but time is clearly on us here. But you're also chair of the public sector pension reform. How is that going? What's this, and the public understands this, particularly in the context with public workers or having two pensions. So there's a lot of issues surrounding that. The fact that there's a government pension, there's an NIS pension. What factors are what is the reform hoping to do? What's the objectives of the reform committee?
Well, the genesis is where there was a court ruling that restored public sector pension based on the Constitution.
Yeah.
So what you find happening now that an existing public officer on retirement is entitled to two pensions, one from NIS and one from the government.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one from NS is a contributory pension scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, the employer pays back,
Yeah.
the employee pays back.
Yeah.
The one from government is non-contributory. And it's simply based on you having attained, more than 26 years approximately service, and you reach the age of 60. So you get a pension, and that continues until you die.
Yeah.
Of course, if you die, the pension dies, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that has proven to be not not sustainable fiscally, right? Because of the burden and
But the
the
employer,
content,
which
right?
is the government, is already
Yeah.
paying a contribution to.
So
to
the
your
whole
pension.
idea is to see how best we could fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, ultimately, you would really want to have one pension.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what the reform is about looking at these two pensions arrangement and see how you could have some permutation, yeah, that would ease the fiscal burden on the employer while giving the employee a total pension that does not put them into poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does not put them into poverty.
Yeah.
Because you heard the talk about you retiring into poverty,
Yeah.
retiring into
Yes,
poverty.
we've heard this, yeah.
All right, so that's the essence of what the reform is seeking to do. And then the other issue is the entitlement. Because I know government HR policies, historically, you have established public workers, unestablished, temporary, all kind of categories, right? And some have been disenfranchised that they have been so long there, and based on the existing pension arrangement, they would not be entitled to a pension from the government. They would have an AS, and that put them at a disadvantage. So it's trying to address all these issues and to have a common or singular pension arrangement for the public officer that when they retires, they would have a comfortable total pension that will allow them at least to take care of themselves in their old age.
I really appreciate this explanation,
So,
Doc.
Curland,
And
the question I have for you is the current pension arrangement unfunded? Is it unfunded?
Well, the way I would answer that, right, government has an obligation, all right, to meet pension requirements. They have an obligation.
Yeah.
But it's not that government put aside a pot of money that when these pensioners retire, you take it out of the pot. It's
recurrent. It's coming
it's
from
coming
recurrent.
from it's coming from
It's
recurrent
unfunded.
expenditure.
Chris,
It's unfunded.
Chris, we run out of time. That's all the time we have, unfortunately. But Doc, is there any closing statement you want to make? I know you have a session tomorrow.
I have a session
So,
tomorrow.
Tell us about this.
Yes,
in closing,
I have
yeah.
a session tomorrow, and I'm very happy we had this conversation. I
Yeah.
really want to personally invite you and Chris to
Yes,
come. I want to
yes.
see you guys there.
What time is this
All right,
location?
It starts at 7 at the Trade
This is
Center.
St. Kitts, this Scarecrow.
St. Kitts, yeah. Would it
Yeah.
be online though? Would it be on Zoom?
It would be online, and I'm looking forward to Chris
Okay.
doing him some questions,
Okay.
right? It would be online, and that's where we would bring the curtains down,
Yeah.
and that whole period of consultations,
Yeah.
and explain to the public what, as a team, what we'll be recommending to the government.
Yeah.
Get their feedback, all right, before we do a final
So
operation.
at what point you hope that this will be in law? From January 1st? Is that the timing that you're looking
Yes,
for?
well, my remit was to work towards January the 1st, 2024
Yeah.
date. That's our remit, but
Yeah.
things can
Yeah.
change, right?
Yeah.
But that's remit looking at 2024, and I think most people are already aware,
Yeah.
based on the document you quoted
Yeah.
from, what the rates most likely would look like,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And so I'm hoping that companies like Citizens Paint and so would make the necessary adjustments and budgetary preparation
Chris-
if there is any impact. If there is any impact,
Byron, I would like to suggest that we bring back Dr. Gilchrist to talk about pension.
I think so.
Pension is a major thing for the
Yeah.
economy of
Yes,
Grenada going
yes,
forward.
yes.
And what is going to happen when we finally, and I'm not sure Labour is part of this committee.
Yeah,
That is
they-
another important aspect of the pension arrangement that we need to discuss.
Viewers, that's all the time we have. We want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank Dr. Gilchrist for being here. And you have to come back on the pension issue.
I
Thank you
will,
very
I
much.
will.
Have a good evening. All the best. Happy All Saints. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Forum came to you in association with the Grenada Development Bank.